As anyone who was here yesterday evening will know, Andreas Kornevall is a brilliant storyteller. He engages you so fully in these extraordinary stories that you become part of the scene. He's an accomplished and entertaining storyteller, as well as a writer, mythologist, and a mythologist, with particular interest in Extinction Rebellion at the moment. He's worked with the Archaeological Society of Sussex Past to recreate the ancient pagan Anglo-Saxon creation myth, and works with the National Trust in restoring the landscape of the South Downs. He has deep knowledge of the ancient Norse myths, on which he lectures and runs experiential courses, as some of us here have experienced and are highly recommended. And this morning he will speak to us about walking between the worlds. Andreas Kornevall.
So we are living in a world of fire at the moment. So we need stories about fire and how to handle fire. So not in this world, but in another world, the people were consumed by fire. But not on the outside, it happened on the inside first. It was in here that fire started to burn. And when fires start to burn inside, you start to want things. You start to want to devour things like fire does. And people started to look to the north, to the east, to the south, to the west. And everywhere they went, they wanted to eat because they always felt hungry. They always wanted more. You could never stop. But you see, when the fires were burning on the inside, what happens on the outside? Real fire starts to burn. Actual flames start to burn. Did the people notice? Oh no, they did not. So the real fire starts to burn on the north to the east, and the walls of fire starts to consume this world. And as it does, the trees start to fall. And not long, the animal, all the animals starts to go. People notice? No. They are still wanting because of the flames inside of them. So they're running around until the entire world started to burn so much that the people themselves started to perish. Everything that you have ever loved disappeared. Everything that you have ever cared for. It burned so much that the earth at the time was reduced to an ocean of ash. That's all that was left. But the old myths will tell you one thing, that an ending always has a beginning. And in this story there's no difference, because somewhere out there in another world there were two beings, two bird beings. One of them was called Ikanshu. Great, like the great angels. Don't believe in angels who have white wings. The real ones have golden eagle feathers. And they soar. And Ikanshu was one of those ancient angels who had the great eagle feathers like the golden eagles have. And his friend Kune. And they had grown up on this earth that had been reduced to ashes. And they were longing for home. They wanted to come back home. Like we all do in our world of ashes. We're all longing for home. Especially our spiritual home. And as they were flying, they could only see an ash world. And they were looking for their village. And they were wondering, what's happened here? What has taken place on this world? And when they were thinking that, of course, the person they meet, and who's usually the last one to survive things like this, we call him the Trickster. In some parts of the world, he's coyote. Where I come from, he's Loki. He's either a fox or a coyote or a rascal. But he's up there in the clouds, in this world. Does he have one eye? Yeah, he's got one eye. Is he smoking a cigar? Probably. And he's up there and he's saying, I know what you're looking for. And he looks at them and he says, you are looking for your home. But to find your home, you have to face the western wind. And when you do, those great wings of yours, your feathers, will start pointing down. And that's when you go and find your home. And that's what Ikanshu and Kuna did. And the western wind came, and their eagle feathers, you know how they have fingers? They started to point down, and they went down, 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 down into that ash. And Ikanshu, he was starving. Starving for something to eat. But there was nothing. And he was looking in the ashes. And as he was looking, he found something. And he found a piece of coal. Now this piece of coal, Ikanshu was a bird, he was a spirit being, a bird man of sorts. So he knew what this was when he looked at it. He saw the piece of coal of the last tree that had been burnt down in this world. The last one. Can you eat that? Can you eat that? I'll have to ask you, have you faced something like that in your life? Some of you may have. When you're holding the last piece of coal of your life. And he looks at this piece of coal and he wonders, what can I do with it? And then he remembers that the ancestors from his village, his great mothers and fathers, they used to make drums. They used to make drums out of wood, out of the trees. So he took the piece of coal and he went. It made a sound of a drum. And he thought, great. So Ikanshu now, if you can see it in your mind's eye, this great nature spirit drumming on the last piece of coal from the last tree that has burned down in this world. And as he was drumming, he thought, well, look, I might as well start to dance. And that's what he did in those ashes. And as he started to dance, he said, I might as well sing. So there he is. There he is. See him now and let him bless you. As he is drumming, as he is dancing, as he is singing, with the last piece of coal from the last tree that has burnt down. And as he is drumming and singing and dancing in the ashes of the world. And now he does this for one night, 2 nights, 9 full days and nights. He drums and sings and dances. Then he falls asleep in the ashes. And he wakes up the next day and he's a bit bewildered. He's wondering what's going on. It's like he's been to a festival for too long. And he starts to think, and he sees the piece of coal. And he looks at it now. And he gives it a good look. And in the center of that little piece, a tiny shoot is starting to grow. A tiny sapling. And he thought, wow, one shoot. I have cracked one seed open. From my dancing and from my drumming. And also, I would say, from one or two tears from what has happened to this world. And then the little shoot starts to grow. Yggdrasil is coming back. The tree of life is coming back. The rhythm of life is coming back. And as he is chanting and dancing around this tree, he grows taller and taller and taller. He takes a rock, he finds a rock from the ashes, and he throws it at the tree. Strange thing, but he does that. And when he does that, the branches fall off. And when they land in the ashes, new trees start to grow. Until, slowly, a forest is starting to return. And when forests start to return, animals start to come back. And when that happens, people start to come back. He's drumming and dancing in this web of song and creation. And this story comes from the people that are living amongst the flames of the rivers of the Amazon. This story comes from those who face those flames every day, who face the arrogance of the world. And every year they remember this story. And of course it is a ritual that I'm telling you. And every year they go out and they throw rocks like Ikanshu does on all of the fruit trees. And they share the seeds together for the raw possibility of life, that it can restore itself. So, that is what we have to learn to do. We need to start drumming and dancing and singing in these ashen days. So let the star rise, let the wave break, and let the flame leap. And if your hearts are wise, spread this story. This story is for you to keep. Now that is a story of transformation and restoration. So my name is Andreas Kornevall, and I started on this journey when I lived in a mountain region of the Pyrenees, and it was there that one morning I had my cup of coffee, as you do, and I looked out to the mountains, and I knew that in those mountains, cinnamon lived there. In French, we call her cannelle. Cinnamon is the Pyrenean brown bear. Great. Can you imagine having a brown bear where you live? I would tell you this, the mountains were higher, the snows were whiter, the valleys were deeper, because she lived there. Whenever a child looked into those valleys, they would be transfixed because they knew that cannelle was out there, caring for her young, or finding a mate, doing all these things. On the same day as I was ruminating and having a reverie about this wonderful bear, TF1, which is the French BBC, that said that there was a gunshot in the Pyrenees. And the last Pyrenean brown bear was shot to extinction. Extinction has nothing to do with death. Hela, the goddess of death, will tell you that extinction has everything to do with the ending of birth. It's a whole other thing. Very few of us know what that actually means. We don't have prophets that speak from a place where birth ends. We don't have it. It's a new territory. You know what? When I heard that news, that gunshot, I still have what's called a tinnitus of the soul. I can still hear it ringing deep inside of my soul. It's like a tinnitus. I can hear it. And the worst thing about it is that no one gave her a resting place. Where were you when the last Pyrenean brown bear was shot to extinction? You know what? I'm going to say something very heretic now, for those of you in this church. I blame the spiritual masters. Whoa. You know why? Because there was no wreath for her after she's lived there for 50 million years. You can write as many books as you want, but I wanted to see something of substance. It's called projection. I projected all of that onto the Pope, onto all the Buddhist masters, all the other supposedly ascended masters. Where are you? Come on. What's going on? What is the silence all about? Yes, I know I'm being heretic. But I was young, or youngish then. And it's disappeared, that feeling, after a while. I had it, the tinnitus have it in my soul, but it sort of went away. But then, another news came in. That the Japanese river otter had gone extinct. And I thought again, okay, we're going to give that a little tick on the IUCN red list on a keyboard, and that's it. Is that what science is giving us? When the river Dolphy of the Yangtze in 2006, the goddess of the river of China. We're not talking, these are big beings. When she was extinct, I started to feel a real sense of anger that started to brew in me, a proper anger. But I had nowhere to go. I looked to the east. I did the ashrams. I did the temples. But no one could find me an answer for this disconcerting feeling. And when I started reading about the extinctions of this landscape, it just started to flood in. Don't think that we are any different for those who live in the Amazon. We shot our lions long ago, and the wolf. For any of us who carry that, for any of us who think you can capture and use the spirit of the wolf, the essence of the wolf, when you've shot the wolf to extinction, that anger is starting to really burn inside of me. Something justice has to be done. Okay. In French we say the crème de la crème happened when the tortoise of La Pinta Island, the one that Charles Darwin had plucked his knowledge from, the tortoise which gave him the theory of evolution. Not only, but some of that knowledge came from the Galapagos. Indeed, quite a lot did. Every university is based on that. All our biological knowledge is based on that. What happened to the tortoise of La Pinta Island? Lonesome George went extinct, 2010. That was it. I said, that's it. But I still didn't have any answers until I opened the book of my ancestors. The Poetic Edda. If you don't know the Poetic Edda, you wouldn't know about Wayland. That's where he comes from. The Poetic Edda is a myth work. What does a myth mean? What is the definition of a myth? Not you, Tim. Anyone else? Why is the Poetic Edda a piece of myth? What is a myth?
Story through time.
It's what's inwardly true.
It's a universal truth clothed in a story.
It's not a bad definition, but someone called Sean Kane will tell you, and he's a very good source for this, there are many definitions of myth, but one to keep in mind of is that myth has no author. No one can write a myth. Tolkien cannot write a myth. J.K. Rowling cannot write a myth, because the myth is the psychological compost of all of humanity. And when the myths are then spoken, within them they have what we can say eternal truths, or truths which are deeper than just one person sitting writing a book, because it comes from the collective. Another great scholar, a Roman scholar called Salicius, he said that myths never were. They have nothing to do with history. They always are. The myth I've just told you is an old myth, and it speaks directly to our present moment. The creation myth of the Edda tells you about climate change like a scientist from NASA. Okay. It speaks about the issue of spiritual debt. And when I heard that, when I read the Poetic Edda, I got the instructions which I mentioned last night. And these instructions came from the most unlikely person, the most unlikely spirit, terrifying goddess. Her name is Hel. Suitable name for a goddess like that. Hel, that's what she's called. With one L though, just in case your Christian complex starts to... because that sways all over here. And what I would say is she gave very clear instructions. If you want cannelle and cinnamon to come back, if you want to stop extinctions, she says, you have to have the courage of thousands to look into those ashes. You have to look into the ashes like Ikanshu did. And who has that? That's hard. There is a girl right now who's doing it. And I will say this. Anyone who curses her name here has to come through me first. Greta Thunberg is one of our daughters, and she's been cursed. And we hear that too in the myths. She's speared and burnt in the myths, especially a young spirit like that speaks the truth. But what I would say is, when Hela gives the instructions, she says, if you have the courage of thousands to look into the ashes of the world, then you have to learn how to weep. You have to learn how to grieve properly. Really properly. And I thought, wow. Maybe I didn't do that for the Pyrenean brown bear. Maybe I was just angry. Maybe I didn't do that for the river dolphin or the Yangtze. Maybe I just kept a kind of frozen anger. So I had to melt the ice of that anger, and I had to learn to cry. So I set up the world's first memorial for extinct species in 2011. And it was included in the Brand, I think it was in the Brand travel books, which was the Holy Landscapes of England. It was the youngest landmark ever. It was 1 year old. Amongst the stones, which are thousands of years old. There they were, this cairn that we built, stone by stone, representing all the extinct species. And we went there and we sung and we cried to those species. And we remembered their names. And you speak about feeling nature spirits. When you do that, the whole land is just reverberating. It's responding to this. So maybe Hela has a point. And she did. And it was interesting that I found it in the Poetic Edda. The Poetic Edda, you see, it's an incredible manuscript that was hidden for 500 years. It was found in the 11th century, and it was hidden. We don't know which family kept it, but we know that it was kept safely through the medieval ages, all the way up to 1643, when a bishop did find the animal skins, that they were original. Bishop did find it. He could have just set it on fire. one match, the whole thing could have gone up in flames. But instead, he kept it, and he gave it to the King of Denmark. And it's called the Codex Regius. And the King of Denmark kept it until 1973. So 1643 to 1973 was kept in Denmark. And then the monarchy decided it's time it goes back to Iceland, where it was found. How do you transport something as precious as that? No one knew what to do. The government refused to put this script on a plane. Because if you did, there's the risk the plane will crash with the manuscripts. They even thought putting on different planes was unsafe. That is the preciousness of an indigenous story. Because that is where we know we come from. Anyone who opens the Poetic Edda would read about Wayland the Smith, would read about the old gods. You would read about the creation myth and how it all began and your origins. So they said no. They took warships. It took forever to find the right time, but warships transferred the Poetic Edda back to Reykjavik, where it is now. And what stories do you find within the Poetic Edda? What is the central animus mundi inside the Eddas? Does anyone know? I've just told the story. It's the great tree. And what kind of tree is that? The ash tree. Because it says, again, the instructions of Hela, if you want to save the ash trees, you've got to start the processing of showing your love. And some of us are trying to find rituals, like we just heard this morning, to find ceremonies of how to actually fill up that well of memory with our tears, to feed the roots of the tree. That's what it does. And in the Edda, an old woman, her name is Urd. She's not a sun goddess. She's from the moon. You see, the sun gods are those who insist that everything lives in the present moment. We call them the Zen masters. Very beautiful. It's a great teaching. But old crone, do you think she listens to them a lot? No. She is within the realm of memory. And she really cares for memories. She does. And in the poetic world, the mythic imagination tells us that memory forms like dew on the valley. And that dew, the sun gods want to burn up as they rise in the morning. But Urd, she collects in her vat, or whatever it is she carries, and she goes and she takes each bit of dew into her vat, and she pours that into the well of memory. And those are all of your memories, the good ones as the bad. And she pours it in because she finds them too precious. And the tree, one of the major roots, grows from the well of memory and feeds the tree of life. And on top of that water are two swans that forms love. Love is associated with our capacity to have memory. And when we forget the old ancestor, when we forget the people behind us that made us who we are today, and we have the attitude that we can just walk out and not give them due gifts and ideas and festivities from them, what happens to the great tree? What happens to the ash tree? It gets sick. It gets sick. It starts to die. There's nothing clearer if you ever read Völuspá or if you read the Ragnarök, what happens to the ash tree when our memories fade. So the work, in a way, the spiritual activism of a heathen like myself is to revive those memories again and to sing the songs of the ancestors again. But it's nothing to do with inventing. No, you take it from the source. You keep on looking at the source. I'll give you one. You can shout it out. You can shout after me. This comes straight from the Edda. It's an invocation. This invocation comes from a Valkyrie as she's freed from the fires. And she says this. She says, "Hail the day!
Hail
the day! Hail the sons of day!
Hail the sons of day!
Hail the night and her sister!
Hail the night and her sister!
Look upon us here with friendly eyes.
Look upon us here with friendly eyes.
And give us victory.
And give us victory.
Hail the gods!
Hail the gods!
Hail the goddesses!
Hail the goddesses!
Hail the fruitful earth!
Hail the fruitful earth!
Give us eloquent speech,
Give us eloquent speech,
wisdom,
Wisdom.
and healing hands,
and healing hands,
for as long as we live.
for as long as we live.
So here I've told you about extinction, and one of the areas that, of course, is very close to our own hearts is the landscape in which we live in. I'm from the South Downs. I live there now. And there is a story from the Heron Bird. And the Heron Bird told this story. I heard this story in Ireland, but it comes from here. And it's from the land of Logres. And this story tells us that the land of Logres was fed by 5 wonderful wells. And from these wells, the river started to flow into the landscape, and everything was healthy and good. The salmon was in the water. The wolf was out in the forest. The bear took care of their young. All the great eagles were in the skies. And the wildflowers were singing like clocks with the wind. The land was intact in the land of Logres. One day it was. And these wells had well maidens. And these well maidens, any weary traveller coming across this landscape would sit by the well. And the well maidens would sing. They were beautiful. And they would have a golden platter, like that. And on the golden platter, there was a Lafite Rothschild 1962. All right? There was a wine that is almost priceless. And there was bread, there was cheese, there was food that you would eat that would sustain you and nourish you. And there was water from the well, clear, beautiful water. And anyone who went by had that treatment. And you would sleep well, and then you would go away the next day. But it so happened that one day a king and his men came through this land of Logres, a name I won't mention here. But of course, he received the same treatment. He saw the golden platter, and he thought, gold, that's wealth, isn't it? And he saw the bottle of wine, and he thought, oh, I like that. And the bread, and the water. And he ate everything. He ate everything, to the last bit. Then he took the golden platter to himself. And then he raped her in front of his men. A king to do such a thing. A king. And when his men saw that, they thought, well, if he's raping the well maidens, well, we will do the same thing. So they went, took the food, took the wine, took the water, and raped the well maidens. they don't sing anymore. They don't sing anymore. The waters are not pure anymore. You cannot drink from the waters anymore. Do you think the great animal's power stayed? The wolf left. The next day at sunrise, the wolves were gone. Golden eagle? Never would he, golden eagle, fly above such a landscape. The bear disappeared. The wildflowers, what happened to them? Is it 0.5% left? Maybe one flower is hanging to dear life. And a great wound was made in the land. And this story is from the Heron Bird, who tells us this. A great wound. And some of us call it the masculine wound, because, as some of you may know about the Fisher King, he received a wound in his groin after such a horrible deed. It was a castrated land that followed when the wild powers left. So that is a myth that tells you a little bit about our environmental problems, if there ever was one. And a lot of things can be said about that raping when we look out, when we see those iron needles going into the soil, when we harness all these powers to grow crops. In the Eddas, the gods had to do the same thing for us to have food. The gods had to kill the first baby of the universe. His name was Ymir, because they had to harness his power to make the 7 worlds. And when they did, Odin himself knew that a horrible debt had been made. Just the same debt that happened when our ancestors took the bull, harnessed the bull to plow the field. The gods did the same thing in the universe. And when that happens, we created order from chaos, but there is a price that we have to pay. And we call that price Ragnarök. It's when the giant powers come back for what they are owed. And that price, interestingly enough, the baby of the universe, Ymir, well, he wasn't quite a baby, he was the size of galaxies, but he was the firstborn being. His skull was the sky. His skull was the sky that they took. So they took his skull and they made the sky in our world. His brain were the clouds. So what is Ymir in today's world? You have to use your mythological muscle now. What is he? He is the climate. He is the climate. And he will come back, or he is coming back, stirring trouble. Stirring a lot of trouble. And our debts are seen within the heavens of his skull. We can see the debts that we've made in the gas chamber that is above us. Now that is another indication of how myths never were, they always are, they always speak of our current predicament. And the other thing I need to say, I think is very important, is to distinguish 2 things. There is the idea of mythos, which is subjective world of our experience. So when we say that the world is flat, that is how we experience the world, right? Some cultures say that there is a tortoise underneath the world, and elephants underneath that tortoise. So that is our experience, and that is called mythos. The old Greeks said there were 2 ways of knowledge. Mythos, which was direct experience and our subjective experience. It's a great source of knowledge. And the other one was logos. Logos is the objective, it's the scientific. Big danger comes when you try and mix the two. Because what happens then, when someone tells you that the world and the universe was made in 7 days, so someone like Richard Dawkins, it just doesn't work. Because the two worlds are separate. One is the world of poetics. It's the world of language. It's the world of deep meaning. It's the world of experience. Myth is something we experience. It's not something you put under a lab. But our experience gives meaning. And our experiences are what's called subjective truths. And those truths are just as important as the objective truths. But the sad thing in our world, and I would say this with some certainty, that when you are living in the world of mythos, logos is writing the terms and conditions. So if you have an experience or a belief that the world was made in 7 days, or indeed, like I do, that the world was created between the fire and the ice, the logos will say, prove it. And when that happens, a lot of people today, and this is happening right as we speak, someone is in the deserts of Jordan, digging up, trying to find the rib of Adam. Thinking that it will be there in the sand. There could be someone looking for Troy, Tim. How is it possible that we are in such intellectual deficit? In ancient Greece, Richard Dawkins can sit with a Baptist preacher and they can have tea and have a nice conversation because they both know that those two knowledges are two fountains. They flow. Yes, they go alongside each other, but they don't merge together. What is the worst thing that happens when they merge together? What do you create?
Fundamentalism.
Fundamentalism. You create literalism. Someone will say to you, this is the rib of Adam. And they will flick around with some rib. They will talk about some shroud of Turin and thinking that is really, They will start having these ideas. And that is very dangerous because fundamentalists, why they are being created, they are inadvertently being created by logos. Because they are demanding them to bring out the proof of their reasoning. Anyone who's involved with that must stop immediately. I'm not saying that, of course, you can do whatever. But don't end up in a situation where you have to defend your views that the world sits on 2 elephants in front of Richard Dawkins. It's ridiculous. And that is a problem when you face indigenous people. Indigenous people live with experience. They live in how they see the world. They speak from their senses. And that's something that we should learn again, to allow our senses to do the talking. And of course we have seen the space probes, of course we understand that the world is round, but in the way in which we are experiencing the world, we can imagine lots of things what the world is like. And that is an important part of knowledge, because it's to do with relational. We are relating to the world when we are experiencing things like that. So, I'll do one more thing. As appropriately, from Hellas herself, she said, well, look, do all this talking about grief. So I'm going to play you a lament. I don't usually play these flutes. They're Native American flutes. They're rather beautiful because for me, they're one of the flutes that really knows how to cry. So I'll play a lament for cinnamon. For you to feel truly what it means. Really feel it. Don't shy away from it. Don't be courageous. Allow yourself to be courageous. That's called the courage of thousands. Hermod, courage of thousands. That's what's called being a warrior in the right true sense of the word. It's the one who can face, he or she who can face the world. So this is for you, Cinnamon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. That is very moving, and I love what you say about the terms and conditions for Mythos being written by Logos. It's so, I just see that everywhere. Yeah, it's very beautiful. Would anyone like to ask some questions? We have quite a bit of time, actually. Would anyone like to ask Andreas any questions? They're all too moved.
Tim?
Yeah?
Where is your monument to the extinct species?
Excuse me?
Where is your monument? to
Oh,
extinct
the life
species?
can.
Yes.
It's on Mount Caburn, and it's been vandalized over and over and over again.
Oh, no.
And last time, I know there's one stone still there.
Oh,
Where is Mount Caburn?
Mount Caburn is on the east of Lewis. People did not like it. It's far too poignant. But I have to say some good news. There is a life can in Sweden, in Stockholm, that was built around 2013, where lots of school children went to. And we are currently trying to find out whether that has anything to do with the school strikes. Because a lot of school children went through and laid those stones, and you know how children love animals. They probably just, they love the animal. And I took so many kids up to Mount Caburn. We had a great time, and they wrote letters to the extinct species, and they learned about them. 200 every day go extinct. So they couldn't learn all of them, but they learned a lot. So they learned about the big blue in England, for example, that's gone extinct. They learned about the western rhino, and they wrote poems and all those things. And it was a very, very strong feeling. And but I have to say, please build one. There's absolutely We can build life cairns wherever you are. It's simply a cairn, stones, but ideally gather some people around and make sure where you build them that people, the local people, know what it's for. But yeah, please go ahead. They can be built anywhere. We built one in the Galapagos after Lonesome George. We built one there, and the authorities came and they wept. They wrote to us and say they have never wept like that for a tortoise, but they did, and it was very moving. In the beginning, they wouldn't have nothing to do with it, but they built a cairn of lava rocks. So black stone cairn. It's in the national park where Darwin was living when he was in the Galapagos. And it's wonderful to see that the cairn is there in the heart place of biological knowledge. Louise?
Could you tell us a bit, Andreas, about the runes that you teach?
Yes, the runes.
And its connection to Britain.
Well, so the runes are interesting for us, I think, when they become symbols. So the runes are signs, like a language, like the alphabet, but they're also symbols. The difference between sign and symbols is, again, a bit like what we spoke before. A sign is something that is objective. We all need to know what that sign means, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Otherwise, we can't write. So that has an objective knowledge. But the runes are also symbolic, which means they're subjective. They can have meaning. And the exciting part of the runes is when you open the old grimoires, the old books of magic, is that they are presenting us with an initiatory road in life. And that is what you heard last night. The Water of Life is an initiatory story of how you go through your life and what you find in the end and how you manage that. Of course, the brothers live inside of us. Of course, all these things are happening. And what the runes do is the first 12 runes, they are the ones who are called the dark runes. Why do we call them the dark runes? It's because they represent the road into soul, the road into difficulty. It's that moment when you see the guy with the white coat telling you, you've got a dodgy kidney, that's the road into soul. That's when your real treasure starts to show. And that's the road that you have when the prince, when he knocks on the door to open up into the enchanted castle where the lions are there, you have to step forward and face the lions. So the first runic 12 runes show you what it is to go through the soul road, the difficult road. Odin does this in the Mead of Poetry, which is another older story of the Water of Life. And he does it in a shape of a serpent. And the last 12 runes are the runes of the spirit, the runes of the golden eagle. That's the spirit. But you have to earn that to get to the sun. Otherwise your wings melt. We all know. That's what we all have to tell our children. Don't go off to Peru, don't do this. It's all that. They want to go into spirit straight away. So the tempering of the serpent and the world in which the serpent has to go through and the golden eagle, when those things come together alchemically, what do we get? When we merge the serpent with the golden eagle?
Dragon.
What?
Dragon.
Dragon. So the dragon wisdom is the wisdom that can go deep, deep into the dark and very high up into the crowns of the tree of life. And the dragon Fylgja, or the totem of the dragon, is Odin, the god, the Valfather. So that he does that journey. So in the runes, in particular the English runes, I think is fascinating because we don't know the symbolism of the English runes as well as we know the symbolism of what's called the Proto-Germanic runes, which are what's called the Elder Futag. The Futork, which is the English Anglo-Saxon version, we know less about, and they're greater in number. But they have in them this initiatory path, and that's what's so exciting. So when I teach this, we reenact this initiatory path through stories, through ritual, and some things can be quite cathartic because you go through the pain of one rune in order to get to the next rune. For example, the rune of darkness, the rune of depression, you have to try and thaw that, and you use the next rune to thaw the depression because the depression is regarded as frozen ice. Your emotions aren't thawing. like your heart is made of rock. So you use magic, seidr, to break that. So it's very shamanic. It's not shamanic, but it is very akin to it. And the entire row shows you. And I think it's having a bit of a revival. I've been doing this work with Fiona, and it seems to be... I'm asked to go and do this work all over the place, so it's having a revival. And it's wonderful, because these old books, I love the fact that they're coming back again, these old grimoires. And because all these magical paths were always hidden, and they still are to a certain extent. But runes by themselves, what do they mean? It means hidden, something that's whispered, hidden, which means it's something you have to find out yourself. You can't buy a book about runes, really. Yes, you can, but you have to go through the process. What it means to you when you stood with the iron rod knocking on that enchanted castle, or when you held the last piece of coal from the tree of life. So you have to integrate it with your own life. That's the whole point of it. That was a bit of a... But there we go. So that's the dragon. So the runes, and in all the rune stones of Scandinavia, you would find that there's a dragon painted on the rune stone, and the runes are carved on its body. It's a very apt image, because that shows you that initiatory place. And that initiation road is called Helvägen. It's the road to hell, or the road to Hela. That's when you go down into soul, and then the road to the crown of Yggdrasil is spirit. Psychologist, someone like James Hillman, is someone to look up when to regard the work of soul and spirit. There's many things like, but it demands a lot of integration. So it's not all about the light. It's probably more about the dark. Odin is a dark god. He's more interested in his serpent powers, in some regard. But that's why he's such a good teacher. Any more?
Peter at the back.
Peter.
Thanks, Andreas, for your two presentations. Wonderful. I read something recently that, we always thought that Odin, when he hung on Yggdrasil, that Yggdrasil was an ash tree.
Yeah.
And I read some interpretation recently that the Nordic word for ash was actually the genetic word for all trees. And some people think that it may have been a yew tree because of the hallucinogenic properties.
Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts are.
So ask means man. Ask, ash, is actually where we come from. So the ash tree in the creation myth, which is the one to go to for this, Odin sees an ash tree, and Odin is breath. Okay? So in effect, he's breath. He's breath. He's our breath. Well, we're breathing Odin right now. He's breath. That's why language is so important to him. Poetry is so important to him, because he's breath. He's what we put, the energy we put into breath is language, is words. Words are very powerful. So he was breathing his runes, or his language, his breath, onto an ash tree. That's what it says in the Edda. And as he does that, a man comes out of its trunk. So the ash is our ancestor. It's where men were born from. And the other tree where women were born from was the elm tree. And Embla came out of the elm tree. And he even says, it's even written in the sagas, when we live in a world of amnesia, the ash and the elm would suffer. Again, this is about myths never were, they always are. It's not about history. They're speaking right into the present tense. But it is the part about the yew, just technically, it's because it says that it stands evergreen, and of course the ash loses its leaves. So scholars were constantly debating this, and my position is sometimes, because I love the yew. I mean, the yew is just the most formidable, and it's the 13th rune and all of that. But we are never going to get to the. It's going to be ambiguous. We're never going to get to the answer. I sometimes feel the tree of life is the ash tree, but when I pass a yew tree, I'm like, it's the yew tree. When I go to Uppsala, though, where this happened a lot, the ashes are formidably, incredibly tall there, and so they really give you the impression, and they are grown on the graves of the Viking kings. So clearly the ash was, and in the Eddas, it's says, it's from the, it's actually arrived. But yeah, so we are, our ancestors is the ash tree, it's our first ancestor, and the elm. But we can't, if we forget them, we cut their roots off. And that's what's happening.
Thank you.
One more question?
Yep.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm going to pronounce the name right, but could you tell me about Snæfell? Snæfell, the eight-legged horse.
Sleipnir.
Sleipnir.
Yeah. So this horse is the horse that can take you into the place where you need to have the courage of thousands. It's like a horse, you need something to be able to look into the ashes like Ikanshu did. To face the mass extinction that we're living through, we can't start. You know why conspiracy theories are everywhere? That is just people who don't dare to look. It's much better to start pretending it's some other. It's, what's his name? He's always to blame. George Soros. George Soros to blame. It's like, you know, I did it to myself. I did a conspiracy theory to myself. I thought, how bad can I make? I made myself the Antichrist. I managed to write out a conspiracy story myself that I was linked to the weapons industry. I linked myself to that. I linked myself to Bill Gates, I think, as well, and some terrible, dark underworld magical order. Yeah? So with that, I managed to write out on myself that I'm like the enemy, you know. And it took me very quickly how this can happen. And with a bit of sophistication, I could have made it into a film. Yeah. Maybe I should do that. But that is when you don't dare looking deep into what's called the wound. But having said that, the wound is where also the healing is. So that's the trouble. I wish it wasn't like that. I wish it was a lot easier. I wish it wasn't like we had to look into the wound to find the healing, because it's painful. It's not easy. And for the prophets in the past, having a spear through your body, hanging on a cross or a tree, like Odin and Christ did, that's painful processes to gain this knowledge. That's not easy. But the tree, in a way, is the original cross in the book. Although the cross, I believe, was... what wood was that? I forgot the trembling...
Oh, aspen.
The aspen. It trembles ever since because it's so afraid. It's afraid of what happened to it. It's trembling. It's got fear since our yeah. Any more quick queries? Yep.
You mentioned you was the 13th sign, but
Well,
beforehand you said the 12 and 12, and I was thinking, where's the 13th sign to make the whole system dynamic?
yeah. Okay. I can't. We can't go into the magical workings of runes. We'll be here till this evening, because the rune row is a cipher. So the rune row that you mostly likely are encountering is not the rune row that you need to learn. It's a protected rune row. So the Futag, magical orders will all tell you that, well, not all of them, some of them will tell you that the Futag is protecting its meaning. So when you look at it straight away and you try to do the numerology of the Futag, you'll get it wrong. Mm-hmm. The numbers will be wrong. Mm-hmm. Because people don't want you to start doing spells if you buy a book from a bookshop. So you had to go through initiations in order to actually learn what the rune row is. And luckily we have old crazy runologists from Sweden who still regain that knowledge. One of them is called Sigurd Argell. Look him up. He's the Yeats of Sweden. Lived in the 1930s. He still retained those old tomes and those old books. So luckily we still have that knowledge. But he was about to go, but we still have it. That's what I teach.
What's his name, Andreas?
Sigurd Argell. Argell. Sigurd Argell. He's the runologist that's kept it. But that's a very big conversation. That takes, it's a whole course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Final
You
one.
probably know, but I thought everybody else might like to know that it's Lost Species Day on the 30th of November.
Yeah.
So people have another opportunity to grieve.
Yeah, I founded that with Persephone. Yeah, we did that after she's very much on the life can. Yes, 30th of November, wonderful. Goodness, yeah. So much trouble. Yeah, but that's something. Build a life can on the 30th of November.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be big. It can be small, but it would have power, I'll tell you. Once it's built, it will have a heartbeat. The nature spirits recognize those tears. They recognize your love. Okay.
Thank you.
Right,
Andreas.
thank you.
I wanted to say something, I just felt this huge...